winter of 1891 came hard to the Montana highlands, the kind of cold that didn't just press against a man's skin, but sank deep into his bones, setting up camp there. Snow had been falling for days, blanketing the pines and the narrow valleys, clogging the creeks until the water ran under a crust of ice. Jonas McGraw, a trapper turned reluctant rancher, was out in it that morning, walking the line where his cattle drifted near the timber. He moved slow, boots crunching, rifle slung on his shoulder. He'd learned long ago not to fight the land, just to endure it. That was when he heard something that didn't belong. At first, it was only the groan of shifting ice, a sound he'd known all his life. But under it came something thinner, sharper, like a cry carried on the wind. Jonas stopped, his breath rising in a pale cloud. He listened. There it was again. A voice, weak, frantic. His boots broke trail fast as he angled down toward the creek bed. The snow was deep, the drifts up to his knees, but he forced his way through. The closer he got, the clearer it became, a cry for help, raw and breaking. When he reached the bend in the creek, he saw her. A young woman, clinging to the jagged rim of ice, her body half submerged in the black water. Her dress was soaked through, stiff with freezing water, her hair plastered to her face. She was shaking so violently, it seemed she might break apart. Her eyes found him, wide and wild. Her lips moved, but the words barely carried. Don't let me go." Jonas dropped to his knees at the bank, reaching for her. "Hold on, girl. I've got you." Her fingers were red, raw, slipping on the edge of ice. She'd fought hard to stay above the water, but her strength was gone. One slip, and the creek would take her under. Jonas shoved his rifle aside and lay flat on the ice, reaching further. The cold burned his hands as he grasped her wrist. She was so cold it felt like gripping stone. "Come on," he growled through clenched teeth, pulling with all he had. "You're not going under today." Her body broke free of the water with a terrible sound, her breath coming in ragged sobs as he dragged her onto the bank. She collapsed against him, trembling, her soaked clothes already freezing stiff. Jonas stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, holding her upright. "Stay with me," he said, his voice low but steady. "You're not done yet. Not out here. Not while I've got you." Her head pressed weakly against his chest, and though her lips were too cold to form words, her eyes filled with tears. And in that moment, Jonas knew, whoever had left her here, half drowned in this frozen creek, had meant for her to vanish beneath the ice, but she wasn't going to vanish, not while he was breathing. Jonas knew minutes mattered. The girl was half dead already, skin pale as the snow, lips blue, her body quaking so hard he thought her bones might snap. If he let her sit still in this cold, she'd be gone before the sun dropped behind the ridge. He pulled her up against him, her head lolling against his shoulder, and rose to his feet with a grunt. She weighed almost nothing, as if hunger had worn her down long before the creek nearly finished her. "Easy now," he muttered, shifting her in his arms. His breath clouded the air as he trudged toward the timberline, where his cabin sat 2 miles up the slope. 2 miles of snow, drifts, and bitter wind. 2 miles to keep her heart beating. Her lips parted, a whisper barely leaving them. "Cold. I know." He adjusted his coat tighter around her. "But you keep your eyes open here. You don't close them on me." For a while, the only sound was his boots crunching, the hiss of the wind through the trees, and her shallow gasps. Jonas kept his pace steady, each step an act of will. He'd hauled elk quarters heavier than this girl, but never with a clock ticking so loud in his head. He'd banked a fire that morning. At last the cabin came into view, hard, smoke curling faint from the chimney where he shouldered through the door, the warm air inside rushing to meet them. Jonas laid her gently on the bed by the hearth. She shivered violently, teeth chattering against the silence. He stripped off her soaked dress with quick, sure movements, not for shame but for life, and threw a thick wool blanket over her trembling frame. He hung her wet clothes near the fire, then grabbed another blanket, wrapping her like he would a newborn calf on a blizzard night. "Stay with me, girl," he urged again, kneeling beside her. "You'll be warm soon." Her eyes fluttered open. Up close, he could see she was younger than he first thought, no more than 20. Her face was thin, cheeks hollow from hunger, but her eyes, they were the eyes of someone who'd seen cruelty and survived it, at least until now. "Why?" She tried to speak, but her voice broke, rasping. "Don't push it," Jonas said. He fetched the kettle from the fire, poured hot water into a tin cup, and cooled it with snow until it was safe. Then, holding her upright, he coaxed her to sip. The warmth brought a flicker of color back into her cheeks. She closed her eyes, whispering a broken word that chilled Jonas more than the creek ever could. "They left me." Jonas frowned, watching her small hands twitch under the blanket. "Who left you?" Her eyes opened again, glistening with tears. "My kin. Said I was a burden. No food. Too many mouths." The words hit him harder than the wind outside. He sat back, jaw tight. He'd seen men abandon horses when the feed ran short, seen them turn their dogs loose to fend or die. But blood kin, leaving a girl to freeze in a creek, that was worse than cruelty. It was wickedness. Jonas stoked the fire higher, throwing another log on until the flames roared. The girl's shivers eased little by little, her breath slowing. He sat beside her, the weight of her words gnawing at him. "Name?" he asked quietly. Her lips trembled before the sound came. "Clara." He nodded. "Well, Clara, you're not dying out here. Not while I've got a fire burning and hands that can work." Her eyes softened, and for the first time since pulling her from that frozen creek, Jonas saw a flicker of something behind the fear. Trust. And as the storm howled against the walls of his cabin, Jonas knew one thing with certainty. If her kin thought she'd perish unseen in the ice, they'd reckoned wrong. She was alive, and he was going to keep her that way. For 2 days the storm raged outside the cabin, sealing the mountain pass with drifts taller than a man. Jonas stayed close to the hearth, feeding the fire like it was the heartbeat of the cabin. Without it, Clara wouldn't last an hour. She slept most of that first day, her body reclaiming what the cold had stolen. Each time she stirred, Jonas pressed broth to her lips, slow and careful. She was weak, but every swallow was a victory. On the second morning, her eyes lingered open longer. Jonas found her watching the firelight dance along the log beams. "You keep a strong fire," she murmured, her voice still thin. Jonas stirred the pot that hung over the flames. "Strong fire's the only reason I've lived this long." He glanced over. "Now it's the reason you will too." Clara's lips tugged into the faintest shape of a smile. "Never thought I'd see kindness again." Jonas didn't answer right away. He ladled out a bowl of stew, rabbit, potatoes, onions, and set it before her. She took it with trembling hands, blowing gently at the steam. He noticed how her fingers, though small and delicate, were red and scarred from cold and work. Not the hands of someone who'd lived easy. "You're young to have seen so much meanness," he finally said, voice low, her eye was lifted to his, steady now. "Hunger makes folks cruel." She sipped the broth, closed her eyes at the warmth. "When the stores ran low, my brothers said I was only taking food better spent on them. My mother didn't stop them." Jonas gripped the edge of his chair. "And so they cast you into the creek." Clara nodded faintly. "Said the river would carry me away. It near did." Jonas stared at the fire, jaw tight. He'd lived alone for years, thinking solitude was safer than being bound to people who disappointed or betrayed. But this, bloodkin turning on their own, this was something he hadn't believed a family could do. "You've got warmth here," he said finally. "Food too, and as long as I draw breath, no one's putting you in that creek again." Her gaze lingered on him, searching, as if weighing the truth of his words. At last, she set the bowl aside and whispered, "Why would you care for me? You don't know me." Jonas leaned back, rubbing the scar on his forearm, an old wound from a winter long ago. "Because once, someone pulled me out when I should have died. A stranger, same as you are to me now. Seems to me a man owes it to the world to return such things." For the first time since he'd found her in the ice, Clara's eyes welled with tears that weren't from pain or cold. She turned her face away, but Jonas pretended not to see. That night, when the storm at last broke, the cabin seemed unnervingly quiet. Jonas stepped outside to split wood. The snow was deep, the air biting. But it wasn't the cold that set him on edge, it was the silence. The mountain usually sang at night. Owls, coyotes, the creak of shifting trees. Tonight, nothing. Just the crack of his axe, carrying farther than it should. Jonas paused, hand tightening on the handle. Down the slope near the tree line, he thought he saw a shape, a dark blot against the snow, watching. When he blinked, it was gone. He carried the wood inside and shut the door firm. Clara looked up from her place near the fire, concern flickering in her tired eyes. Something wrong? Jonas set the logs down gently. Nothing you need worry about. But in his chest, unease tightened like a noose. If her kin had the heart to leave her for dead, he reckoned they might have the heart to make sure she stayed that way. And if they came looking, the mountain man would be waiting. The next morning dawned sharp and clear, the kind of winter light that cut across the mountains like shards of glass. Snow glittered on the slope, blinding white. But Jonas's eyes weren't on the beauty of it. He scanned the tree line, every nerve alert. Clara stirred behind him. She had managed to rise from the cot, wrapped in one of his wool blankets, and stood watching him from near the fire. Her cheeks had some color now, but her movements were careful, weak still. "You're looking for something," she said quietly. "Looking to make sure nothing's looking for us," Jonas replied. He closed the door and stamped the snow from his boots. Tracks by the south ridge. Fresh ones. Too heavy for deer. Clara's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. "It's them," she whispered. "They'll know I lived. They'll come back." Jonas crossed the cabin, crouched down so he could meet her eyes. His voice was calm but steady as stone. "Then let them. You're safe here." But she shook her head. "You don't know them. My brothers. They don't leave things half done. If they see me breathing still, they'll finish it." Jonas rested a hand on the arm of the chair beside her. "Not while I'm standing." For a moment silence hung between them, broken only by the crack of the fire. Clara's eyes softened, though shadows of fear still clung to her expression. That day he kept busy, splitting wood, checking his traps and sharpening the axe and the long knife he carried at his belt. When Clara drifted into restless sleep, Jonas cleaned the old rifle that had gathered dust above his door. He hadn't fired it in months, but the weight of it in his hands felt right, necessary. By late afternoon, Clara woke to find him setting extra logs against the wall and tightening the shutters. She watched him with troubled eyes. "You live like a man used to being hunted," she said. Jonas paused, then shrugged. "Man lives alone long enough, he learns to be ready. The world don't send warnings before it bites." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I don't want to bring danger here. Maybe I should leave before—" He cut her off with a firm shake of his head. "No. You step 1 foot outside this cabin in your condition, the cold'll kill you faster than any man could, and if they come here, I'll deal with it." Her lips parted, but no words came. In the end, she sank back into the chair, staring at the flames. That night, Jonas barely slept. He sat near the fire, rifle across his knees, listening to the creak of the logs and the shifting of snow on the roof. Once or twice he swore he heard something out in the dark, a crunch, the faint crack of a branch. But when he rose and peered through the frosted window, the mountain lay silent under its white blanket. Near dawn he dozed in his chair, only to jolt awake at a faint knock. Not at the door, no, at the shutter. Just once, a single rap of knuckles against wood. Jonas gripped the rifle, every muscle taut. He glanced toward Clara. She was awake, wide-eyed, clutching the blanket to her chest. "Jonas," she whispered, voice trembling. "They've found us." And in the silence that followed, Jonas swore he could hear the faintest sound outside the cabin. Laughter, low, cruel. The kind of laughter that belonged to men who'd throw their own kin into a frozen creek. The cabin walls felt thin as paper against the sound of that laughter. Clara pressed herself tighter into the corner, her lips trembling, whispering words that weren't quite prayers, but close enough. Jonas rose, slow and steady, the rifle in his hands like it belonged there. He walked to the door, not hurried, not reckless, and lifted the bar that held it shut. His voice chorus, ride low and even. "Who's out there?" The reply came sharp, mocking. "Open up, mountain man. We come for what's ours." Clara's breath caught, a small sound of pain and fear. She shook her head fiercely, eyes pleading. Don't open it." Jonas didn't move to. He stood with his shoulder braced against the frame, rifle ready. "She ain't yours, not anymore, and she ain't leaving this cabin with you." Silence, then the scrape of boots in snow, another voice, colder than the first. "She don't get to decide that, neither do you." The barrel of a pistol smacked against the shutter, hard enough to rattle the wood. Clara flinched. Jonas didn't. "You left her in the creek to die," Jonas said. His words were quiet, but carried the weight of iron. "Now, you want to finish the job." A rough chuckle rose outside. "You some kind of hero, then? Think you can stand in the way of kin?" Jonas's jaw tightened. "I think I can stand." A pause followed, long enough for the mountain air to sting in his lungs. Then boots shuffled in the snow. A hand rattled the latch. Jonas lifted the rifle and fired through the top panel of the door. The shot split the night wide open. A cry rang out, then cursing, then the frantic scuffle of men stumbling back into the trees. Smoke curled in the cabin. Jonas lowered the rifle, the crack of the shot still ringing in his ears. Clara stared at him, pale and wide-eyed. "They'll come back," she whispered. Jonas nodded. His voice was grim, but steady. "Aye, they will. And next time, they won't come knocking." He checked the rifle, reloaded with practiced hands. Then he dragged the heavy chest from against the wall and shoved it in front of the door, bracing it. His movements were precise, purposeful. Clara clutched the blanket tighter, shivering though the fire burned bright. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Jonas looked at her. His gaze said, "Eddie," the firelight flickering in his eyes. "Because no one deserves to be thrown away. Not in this world, not in mine." Outside, the snow began again, a slow, steady fall that muffled sound and blurred the line between shadow and man. Somewhere out in that dark, the brothers waited, teeth bared. The wind rose in the night, dragging the snow sideways against the cabin walls like claws on wood. The fire hissed low, fighting to stay alive. Clara sat on the floor near it, her face washed in flickering light, her breath shallow. Jonas hadn't slept. He hadn't even blinked long. He sat by the shutter, rifle across his lap, listening. And then it came, the crunch of boots outside, slow, deliberate, more than one. Jonas raised a hand, signaling Clara to silence. Her lips pressed tight. The voice called through the storm, smooth as oil. "Jonas McCrae, they say you once ran with men like us, hard men, killers. Now here you are, playing house with a woman you don't even know." Jonas's knuckles whitened on the rifle. "A man can change," he said. His voice didn't rise, but it cut through the storm like a blade. Another voice joined, harsher. "She belongs to us. Step aside, and we'll let you live." Jonas's mouth set like stone. "You had your chance to care for her. You threw her to the ice. She belongs to no one, least of all you." A laugh answered, cold, cruel. Then came the pounding against the door. The chest jolted, the wood groaned. Jonas stood, rifle ready. His heartbeat was steady, like a drum he'd long since learned to march to. He looked once at Clara. Her wide eyes met his. For the first time since she had been pulled from the creek, she spoke with something fiercer than fear. "Don't let them take me." Jonas nodded. "They won't." The door cracked under another blow. A hand reached through the splintered gap. Jonas fired once, the blast deafening in the small cabin. A howl split the night. "Back!" someone shouted outside. Then rage. "Burn him out!" Through the shutter slats, Jonas caught the flare of torchlight. The brothers had fire. They meant to smile. "Okay, him out." Clara scrambled to the hearth, clutching at Jonas's arm. "What do we do?" Jonas's eyes swept the cabin. Walls of pine, dry as tinder. He knew. Fire would eat through it fast. He set his jaw. "We don't stay. We move." He pulled his coat from Clara's shoulders and wrapped it tighter around her, binding it at her throat. Then he slung his pack over his back and opened the rear shutter. The storm howled in, cold, cutting like knives. "Stay close to me," he said. Clara clung to him as they slipped into the blizzard's cover. The snow swallowed them instantly, their shapes vanishing into white. Behind, the torches flared against the cabin, shadows of men dancing like devils on the walls. Jonas led Clara uphill, into the trees where the snow was deeper, branches thick with weight. The wind masked their steps, but the brothers were not far. Shouts carried through the storm. "Find them! She's ours!" Jonas crouched low, pulling Clara into the hollow of a fallen pine. He steadied her with one hand, the rifle with the other. His breath fogged the air. The shadows moved between the trees, torches bobbing, voices snarling. Jonas raised the rifle, slow and deliberate, and whispered, "They'll not touch you again." The first figure broke into sight. Jonas fired. The man fell into the snow with a cry, torch snuffing out. Another charged. Jonas met him head-on, rifle swinging like an axe, cracking bone. Snow and blood mixed beneath their boots. Clara clutched at the pine, eyes wide, frozen in fear and awe. The storm screamed. Men shouted. Jonas fought with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose, except the woman trembling behind him. And in that blizzard between the pines, the war for Clara's life was decided not by law or kin, but by the will of one mountain man who refused to let her be abandoned again. And in the cabin, Jonas sat down again, rifle lie, across his knees, his coat around Clara's shoulders. His silence was not fear, it was the silence of a man preparing for the storm.